My dear students, welcome back to my YouTube English channel, English with Malik Sir. In the previous segments of Verb series, which is meant for basic to advanced level of students, we have very clearly discussed about the ideas in connection with the use of modal auxiliary verbs like shall, will, can, may, should, would, could, might, must, used to. In today's segment, we are going to discuss about the key uses of ought to, how and in which way ought to is used in our spoken and written English. Let's see. Ought to is similar to should. It means should is synonymous to ought to. However, ought to is more formal and emphatic. This is the difference. Whenever should is used in informal ways, on the other hand, ought to is used in more formal and emphatic ways. Okay, this is the difference in between should and ought to. Now come to know the various uses of ought to. Point 1, formal obligation or moral duty. It means what is right or civic duty for us to do. Okay, civic duty means the moral duty of a person to discharge in society. In examples, remember, you ought to behave others politely. This is a civic duty. Here the speaker formally or emphatically advises someone to behave others politely, because the way we behave others, we are behaved accordingly. Drivers ought to obey the road safety rules. Here traffic rules strongly instructs the drivers to obey the road safety rules so that they can enjoy safe driving without any possibility of accident. Okay, now the other idea, strong advice or recommendation or suggestion. Whenever we suggest or advise or recommend anything strongly, in that case we use ought to in the place of should. Okay, how? Let's see. You ought to eat fresh fruits and vegetables every day. Here the speaker strongly suggests or recommends or advises someone to eat fresh fruits and vegetables every day, because we can maintain good health by eating fresh fruits and vegetables as much as possible. You ought to study more if you want to learn more. A student is strongly advised or recommended or suggested by the teachers or the parents to study more so that he can learn more. It means if he wants to learn more, he is advised to study more. Next come the other idea, past regret or unfulfilled past action. In this case also we use ought to. How? They ought to have played sincerely, means the players didn't play sincerely, therefore they lost the match. Here the speaker strongly regrets about the unfulfilled past action. In this case we use ought to plus have plus past participle. You ought to have booked ticket in advance, but you didn't book ticket in advance, therefore you didn't get any seat. Okay, this is the matter of regret or sorrow. Now come to the next point. High expectation. Whenever we expect highly, in that case also ought to is used to. How? Let's see in examples here. All the guests ought to arrive by 3 p.m. Here the speaker wants that all his guests ought to arrive by 3 p.m. so that the function can start early and it will be a successful one. India's economic condition ought to improve by the end of this year. It means the government highly expects the economical condition ought to improve by the end of 2026. The criminals ought to be punished by the court as early as possible. The criminals have committed a great blunder. Therefore, they ought to be punished by the court as early as possible. This is the demand of public. Fifth point, negative forms. How we use ought to in negative forms. Whenever we use ought to in negative sentences, definitely not is used in between ought and to. This is the idea. Examples: you ought not to speak your wife like this. It means you shouldn't speak your wife like this. Here the not has been used in between ought and to. This is the negative form of ought to. You oughtn't to talk aloud, you might disturb them. Okay, yes, we cannot write ought to not. Last idea, question forms of ought to. Whenever we use ought to in our question sentences, then definitely ought is used before the subject and to is used after the subject. How? Let's see. Ought I to report the police about this matter? This is a polite offer. Second example, ought we to be more worried about the loss? Here we find ought, then subject, then to, then infinitive. This is the idea how we use ought to in order to express moral duty, suggestion, advice, recommendation, the past regret for unfulfilled action, side by side in our negative and interrogative sentences. Okay, with this I conclude today's segment and advise you to go through the video from the beginning to the end and try to understand each and every point. Then try to apply in your day-to-day speaking and writing. Hope you must have enjoyed this class. Thank you for being with me. See you in the next segment with another modal auxiliary verb. Till then, goodbye.